Welcome, everybody. Brother Dan Goodwin here, your host on this edition of Prosperity News. I have in the studio again my good friend, Brother Michael Smith. Brother Mike, good to have you today.
Thank you, Brother Goodwin. It's always an honor to be back with you.
All right, a Texan from Texas, and that's the only kind of Texans there are, Texans from Texas. So we're glad you're here today. I'm going to read a verse, and we left off with the story of Joseph. Of course, we're talking about Brother Mike's DVD called Joseph in Egypt. Many of you remember Brother Mike from his Cyrus Effect, and we interviewed him right here, and that has really took off, brother. I'm telling you, the Cyrus Effect, the stuff about Trump and King Cyrus. I'm telling you, people around the country have been enlightened by your lectures and your DVD about that, and we want you to know that if you would like to get the Joseph DVD after the program today, just call the number on the screen. And I want to say this Joseph stuff is pretty powerful too. And we're going to take up where we left off, if that's okay with you. I want to take us back to the prison where we left Joseph last week in the program. We left him there all week in prison, but we got to get him out of there. And we're going to do that. So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 41 and verse 1. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years. Now that's the butler and the baker. Remember, Joseph interpreted their dreams. They came to pass just as Joseph said. The butler, the baker dies. He's put to death. And the butler is restored to his position serving the Pharaoh. This was God's plan. God had everything under control. God is going to now use the butler to interpret or tell Pharaoh about a man who interpreted his dream, because Pharaoh's getting ready to have a dream. So let me read a couple verses here. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, and behold, and I'm not going to read all the dream here, but he dreams about a couple of events that are coming, which we know when we see the end of the story. He's dreaming about a famine coming. He dreams about 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of a famine. So let's get to the end of the story here in verse 11. Verse 9, and then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Fault, yeah. He promised Joseph, I'll tell Pharaoh about you when I get there. Remember Joseph? Joseph said, remember me when you get there, tell Pharaoh, I've been falsely accused, get me out of here. Wasn't God's plan though, was it?
No, not yet.
Now tell us a little bit about this.
Well, it's not by accident all this took place because the 2 years goes by because Pharaoh has to have not one dream but two, right? And so he has his dreams, and of course the butler lets him know, yes, I know this man who can interpret dreams. So Joseph is called by the Pharaoh to come forth, if you will.
So now he's out of prison. The story talks about they put clothes on, they clean him up, he gets shaved. Of course, I was joking about it the other day, but here's a new man. He's come out of prison, and he stands before Pharaoh. Now, take us, what happens next?
Well, he tells basically the Pharaoh that after he hears the 2 dreams about the cows, and I don't know if we have to go through that.
No.
Probably not again, but between the wheat that's been withered, if you will, 7 years of good, 7 years of bad, between the ears of wheat and the cows, if you will. But Joseph lets him know that God's going to give him an answer of peace. That's very important. It says it in the script. So he begins to tell him the meaning of it. And so at this time, I'm going to call this the exaltation of Joseph. And after the Pharaoh hears all this, he's so taken back, he's going to put Joseph second in command.
Now, help the audience understand, what did Joseph tell Pharaoh?
He told him that there'll be 7 years of plentiful food, followed by 7 years of horrific famine. And it's important that we store the food.
So Joseph, this is amazing. Joseph just gets out of prison. He's been in prison. He's not an old man. He's still young. He stands before Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, these are my dreams. What do they mean? He tells him what they meant. And then he tells him what to do. Tells him this is what Pharaoh needs to do. I find that amazing.
It is.
And what did he tell him to do?
Well, he said, we need to take 1/5 of the land, which is 20%, and we need to store food. We need to basically harvest all the food that we possibly can during the 7 years. And we need to put it in distribution centers the way that he describes it in here. So that's what's going to take place. And Pharaoh is so enthused by that
He's
that he puts him in
awestruck. I
charge
think
of it.
he's awestruck.
Yes.
I think he says, wow, not only did you tell me the dream, you've just given me the prescription.
The
It's
answer.
like going into a doctor's office and he says, here's what your problem is and here's what you need to do. And that's what Joseph did.
That's it.
And Pharaoh was, I don't think Joseph realized what was coming next. And he says, you know what? Because didn't Joseph say, look, you need to put somebody in charge and here's what he needs to do?
Yeah.
And Pharaoh said, you know what? You got the job.
Yeah.
And he's second in command, isn't he?
That's right. And, we got to keep in mind that at this snapshot in time, this Pharaoh is probably the most powerful political leader on this planet.
Yes.
And he not only tells Joseph he's going to put him in second in command, he'll sit on his right side. Okay, so there's sort of a, Jesus sits on the right hand of the Father. In fact, from this point on, through the entire story, there are many parallels to God the Father in the Pharaoh. This is a good Pharaoh, not to be confused with the very evil Pharaoh that will come around with Moses 400
Right.
years later. So he's put in second in command. He tells him that people will bow down to him. Then he gives him a ring, not just any ring. He gives him his ring of authority. That says something. Then he arrays him in fine linen. In other words, puts very beautiful clothes on him. Then he places a gold chain around his neck. And then after that, he does something else. He gives him a new name. And the name that he gives him a title, actually, and it's called Zephneth Paneah. It's actually a Hebrew Coptic word put together, and technically, in my personal opinion, it means the revealer of secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel really had that title
Right.
too. So there's two people in the Bible, kind of a similar thing here, revealer of secrets. But then that's not it. There's one more gift that he gives him. He gives him a new wife.
Yeah, that's a pretty good gift.
And she is a Gentile, right? And she's actually the daughter of the priest of the sun god On, S-U-N God, with God with a little g, of course. So she's the daughter of that, and her name is Asenath. And so Joseph will get a Gentile wife. Now, the parallel with this is God the Father will give Jesus a Gentile wife also, and that's found in Revelation 21 and 2, and she is the church.
Right. We're the bride of Christ.
That's correct.
Joseph got a Gentile bride, and Jesus has a Gentile bride, the church. I think that's pretty exciting. Now,
Yes.
in the hotel room, or maybe it was this morning, I can't remember, you told me a little story about the Jews of today, and the Jews throughout history have had a problem with this story about that Gentile wife.
That's right.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, they do, because they're kind of scratching their heads like, well, why did God allow Joseph to have a Gentile wife? Well, there's actually a number of reasons. He will have two sons from her. So there's two Gentile sons. One is Manasseh and the other is Ephraim. I'll use the term Ephraim because I'm used to that term. And by the way, later in the Bible, the tribe of Joseph will become two tribes. It'll become Manasseh and Ephraim. The word Manasseh in Hebrew, God basically hears my pain, if you will. Ephraim, God makes me fruitful in the land of my affliction. That's what that name means in Hebrew. Now, I'm going to take just a moment to say something very, very important. I'm going to say something that most people have never heard before, and that is later, these two boys will get the blessing later in the story from Jacob before he dies, but then they go off, and they're going off to the promised land. I want to share something with you that's just off the chart, Brother Goodwin. Very important, and most people are unaware of it. When you go to Numbers chapter 13, verse 8 and 16, people might want to write that down. Numbers 13, verse 8 and 16. Joshua's there. Did you know his name is not Joshua? On the way to the promised land later, his name never was Joshua. His name was Oshia.
Right.
And it is correct. It is correct in the King James Bible. But Moses changes his name in Numbers chapter 13. He changes it from Oshia to Yeshua, or Joshua as you know it in English. Now, why does he do that? Because Joshua will ultimately, and this is a Gentile tribe, Gentile tribe, of the son of Nun. He will be of the son, Joshua will be of the son of Nun, as it says in Numbers chapter 13. Very important aspect, because now, 40 years later, when they go in the promised land, Joshua of the Gentile tribe will lead the Israelites into the promised land. And Jesus will lead us into our promised land, and his name is also Yeshua. Now, the word Joshua is actually the same word in a sense of Jesus, which
Right.
means the Lord is salvation in Hebrew to English. So that's a very important part of the story.
Well, that's exciting stuff. I mean, we could go on all day. Well, folks, we've taken our friend Joseph from he left home and went to a pit. We took him from that pit to Egypt, where he went to the dungeon, to prison. Now, in today's program, we've taken him from prison to the palace. And this is really a story of life, isn't it? The Christian life is kind of like this, and there's ups and downs, and there's a journey that we're on, and all of us are on a journey. Now realize that God is in heaven looking down. God has some things mapped out for us, and we can't see them, can we? We can look, but we can't see that far ahead. You're not supposed to see that far ahead. And all we know is we've got today, and we don't know about tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But we see in the story of Joseph that he gets taken out of prison, goes to the palace, interprets a dream that God gave Pharaoh, and God gave Joseph the understanding of that dream. He tells Pharaoh what the dream means. There's going to be 7 years of plenty. Then there's a big famine coming upon the whole world. And here's what Pharaoh needs to do. He needs to appoint a man to be in charge and to store up food for 7 years so that you can live during the 7 years of famine. Pharaoh scratches his head and says, well, guess what? You're hired. And he becomes the second in command. Now we're going to go a little further, brother. We're going to get into his brothers. We're going to get into the famine. We're going to fast forward about 7 years, actually about 9 years, into the famine. And we're going to see how God uses this. And this is all in Brother Smith's DVD. He shows how God uses the famine, and God uses the dreams, and Joseph's interpretation of the dreams. God had a plan all along. God is going to bring the nation of Israel into Egypt to save them from the famine, now of all things. And so let me just stop and say this. If you'd like to get a copy of the DVD, Rex will put up on the screen how you can get your copy of Joseph in Egypt. It's about 2 hours long. Go to the website, prophecynews.com. You can get it there. Or call the 800 number on the screen during business hours, and they'll be glad to take your information there. And so let's jump back into this, brother. I want to get as far as we can. So we got the brothers coming now. This is the sons of Jacob, right? The 12 sons of Jacob. Joseph's one of those 12 sons. Benjamin's the youngest. The other 10 are on their way to Egypt because they're hungry, right?
Yes.
And so as the brothers arrive in Egypt to buy grain, you give us an overview of what's taking place now.
Well, they show up, obviously, at one of the palaces there, and Joseph actually sees them, but he doesn't want to reveal his identity. So there's dialogue with the brothers through perhaps an entourage of Joseph, if you will. And, well, where are you from? Why are you here? Da 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 da. And, well, they're there to buy wheat. Obviously, their father's Jacob, and they have a younger brother, Benjamin. And, oh, yes, there's one that is not, referring to Joseph,
They don't
who they
recognize
threw under
him,
the
right?
bus, right? But they don't recognize him, right? So, so what happens at this point is they're thrown in jail like spies, and well, what happens after that is they're going to release them, but they're going to take one person, Simeon, and they're going to keep him back as a hostage. And Joseph's people let them know well, you go back home, but we want you to bring Benjamin back with you. Okay,
Now, there's a
so
plan unraveling
there
here,
is a
isn't
plan.
there?
There is a plan. Yes.
And God had a plan. And of course, Joseph's part of that plan. And he had a plan for keeping Simeon. He wanted to see his younger brother, didn't he?
Yes.
And I think he wanted to see his father. I think also, we didn't plan this, but this is one of the things that I tell you comes up when you do an interview like this. I think Joseph is suffering. Joseph has been wronged all those years ago. And it's not been made right, has it?
No.
He was sold, he was thrown in a pit. They were going to kill him. He was then sold for money, sent as a slave. He wound up in jail. He could have very easily gotten bitter at his family, bitter at God. I mean, he's mistreated. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair.
Yes.
And here's his brothers show up all of a sudden. They're hungry. They're wanting to buy, and he sees them. And of course, he's in his Egyptian garbs and he's speaking the Egyptian language. They don't know who he is. And he hides himself, doesn't reveal himself. But I can picture Joseph hurting as he watches his brothers, wanting restoration, wanting forgiveness, wanting to make things right with his family, wanting them to make things right with him. And asked about his little brother. I think he loved his little brother because he asked specifically about him.
Yes.
He's going to ask about his father later. Well, not yet, but he's asking about that little brother. I think there's a beautiful story of forgiveness and sorrow and hurt there that I think we read over and we miss when we read the passage. And I mean, these are real people.
Yes.
I mean, we watch television movies and we read stories. And I think we forget that these are real people. These things really happened. And there's a lot of hurt and a lot of sorrow involved here. All right, so they show up and they buy the bread. Now, take us a little further. He pulls a fast one on them, doesn't he?
He does. He tells his entourage to, well, put food in their sacks, but put their money back in the sacks. But before they go, he told, and we see this later in the story, but he told Judah, the one that sold Joseph for money earlier in our story, if you will, he said, you will not see my face again unless you bring your brother Benjamin with you. Okay, so later when they go back, they realize, oh, the money that we brought, we have the money in our sacks. We're going to have to go back, but then we have our brother Simeon a hostage. For sure, we're going to have to go back. But Judah tells his father later in the story, the man has said, referring to Joseph, the man has said, you shall not see my face again until you bring your brother Benjamin. So we got to bring Benjamin back. And the father's very upset, like, why did you even bring up his name and all this? But Judah assures him, don't worry, everything, I'll take the hit. I'll be responsible for him. He's very reluctant to let Benjamin go because he knew what happened to Joseph. He didn't know exactly what happened to him, but he knows he's missing. He could be dead. Of course, he's been lied to and deceived, right? So anyway, he finally says, okay, I'll let Benjamin go back with you, but I want you to give something back to Joseph. And you could call it like an apple pie, something with myrrh, something with spices and with honey, sort of like a pie. If you would take this back to the man. There's two people referred to as the man in the Bible. By the way, Joseph is one, and Jesus, the man Christ Jesus. Those are so when people talk about the man upstairs, actually sort of came from this story, but although it's really talking about Jesus, Old Testament and New Testament. So I want everybody to know that Benjamin, his name, is very significant in the story prophetically because the word Benjamin in Hebrew is the right hand, if you will, the right hand of God, if you will. So Benjamin goes back. So we have the brothers; they all go back. Now this will be the second time they come into the land when they arrive. And of course, they're going to have Benjamin there. And so they all arrive, and then, of course, there's going to be a great feast at noontime with Joseph.
Okay, so they have the feast, they get their grain, and they're sending them home. and he pulls another fast one on them.
More than one. He pulls more than one. The first thing they do is it's really funny what they say when they arrive at the front door. The person at the front door says, "Peace be unto you, fear not, your God and the God of your father," those are all capital letters, by the way, God and Father, "have given you the treasure in your sacks. I had your money." So they take Simeon and they release him, and then they're told, "Oh, by the way, the man's going to show up at noontime, Joseph, and it's going to be a feast." I want everybody to get this idea of there's going to be a great feast here. So they come in, and as a matter of fact, there's some really strange and unusual things that happen at this, if you want to call it a kumbaya. Uh, there's a feet washing. I call it a feet washing service. Back in those days, Egyptians, trust me, they did not wash the feet of Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, they did, and they gave provisions for their donkeys. And they're told Joseph's going to show up at noontime, and he does. And when the entourage sets the brothers down, they set them down in the order of their ages. Isn't that strange? Which means Benjamin's going to be the last, being the youngest. And then they bring the food out. And by the way, they put 5 times more food on Benjamin's plate than they do the other brothers. Of course, 5, a number of blessing, if you will, a number of grace, if you will. And that takes place. So Joseph shows up at 12. So what's this got to do with Jesus? Remember Jesus with the woman at the well at the 6th hour. I'm in John chapter 4. This place is Shechem, where the story started off when he couldn't find his brothers there earlier with Joseph. And so John chapter 4, Jesus meets the woman at the well at the 6th hour, which, by the way, is noontime, at high noon. And so there is a parallel to all this. So they have the great feast. Everybody's happy. This is the second time they're in the land. And now the brothers will leave. So now they're off to Canaan land. However, Joseph has another plan. He's plotting another plan, and for good, not for evil.
So he put something in the sack.
He did.
And then he sends his you called it the Secret Service, or he sends his guards out to arrest them. They bring him back, and here's where it all happens. And we've only got we got a few minutes left, but this is the most exciting part of the story. He brings them all there. They think they're going to die.
That's right.
And tell us a little bit about this.
Well, what happens? I'm sure they made it very dramatic when they finally caught up with them, and they're on their way home. And well, we want to take a look in your sacks. Something seems to be missing back at the palace, perhaps. They probably waited, maybe Benjamin being the last one, because they knew that they had planted.
So it's in Benjamin's
a
sack.
silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Okay. By the way, I want to be a little more technical about Benjamin's name. It's the son of my right hand in Hebrew, to be exact. And of course, we see the silver cup with Benjamin. We see the silver cup with Jesus also, right? So here it is. What they take him back, and they all think they're going to die now. I mean, it's curtains for them.
I think all he wanted was Benjamin.
Well,
but the others said we can't go back without Benjamin.
Well, but they all do go back.
Right.
Yeah, we know that they go back, and they're very fearful when they show up. And of course, Joseph, later, what will happen is Joseph is crying in the back room so loud it could be heard in the Pharaoh's building. But today is a very special day. Number one, this is the 3rd time the brothers are in the land. I want everybody to get this. And the brothers are back, and now they probably think that they felt like, yeah, we just got caught stealing something. It's over for us. And of course, Judah doesn't want anything to happen to Benjamin. And this is the first time in his life he really steps up to the plate to really look after his young brother, right? And so Joseph comes out and he says some very, very important things. But the very first thing he does is he evacuates all the Gentiles in the room. Remember, this is the day he's going to reveal himself to his Jewish brothers. But before he does that, he wants all the Gentiles out of the room.
Right, so it's just him and his brothers left.
That's it. And there's a story behind that. You know, I said in my video, I personally believe there's a type and shadow of the rapture in the story. All the Gentiles are out of the room. They're gone before he reveals himself to his Jewish brothers. So what happens is that takes place, and then Joseph says, I am. He uses the term, I am Joseph, your brother, that you sold to Egypt.
I am Joseph. Does my father yet live?
Yes.
See, here's where he mentions his father. It was
Yes.
all about Benjamin earlier.
Right.
Now he says, I am Joseph. Does my father yet live?
That's
So
right.
the third time they come back, of course, Judah spills the beans and confesses, we killed his other brother, and now his father will die if Benjamin. And here's their brother standing right in front of him. He's not dead. And that's when he tells the Gentiles to get out. And then for the first time, he speaks in the Hebrew language and says, I am Joseph. And can you imagine what they must have thought? Here's what I'd say today. We're dead. We're dead.
Yeah.
This is Joseph. We're dead. He's going to kill us all. But that's not how it turned out.
Well, the most important thing is it's the third time the brothers are in the land. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the third time that Israel is in the land today. First time with Joshua in the Promised Land. Second time, 70 years in Babylon, returning to Israel. The third time, 1948. This is the third time Israel's in the land, and Jesus Messiah will reveal himself to his Jewish brothers who he really is.
Right, and that time is coming soon. 'Cause after the third time, what does he do first? He takes all the Gentiles out of the room. He's going to take the church out, and then he's going to reveal himself. I am Jesus, whom thou crucified.
Yes.
And that's going to happen, I believe, in the middle of the tribulation with the two witnesses when they die. But, well, we've only got about another minute, brother, and I know you had something you wanted to say at the end. Is there something you could say in the last minute we have, or 30 seconds?
I guess the most important thing is this is one of the most important stories in the Bible because it shows all of the concepts of salvation, all the things that Joseph went through, of course, that Jesus went through as well. And it's because his faith in God that he was able to be happy, if you will, but he knew he had purpose. And we look at the life of Joseph and we see over 100 parallels of Jesus Christ. It's pointing to Jesus.
Wow, it sure
in
is.
all of it.
Folks, that's the key, isn't it? Pointing to Jesus. Folks, I hope that you've learned something today. I hope this has been a blessing to you. It sure has to me. This is a wonderful story. And I hope you know the Lord. I hope you know Jesus as your Savior. If you need any help with that, call the 800 number on the screen or email Prophecy News. We'd love to help you. Until then, my friend, keep looking up.